Callista Mercer had spent most of her early 20s scraping by in a small, run-down apartment in downtown Atlanta. Every day, as the early morning light crept through threadbare curtains, she braced herself against the relentless pressure of mounting bills and the heavy burden of student loans. By her mid-20s, the weight of debt had become inescapable, a specter that haunted every decision she made. Her modest art studio, once a hopeful haven for creative expression, now teetered on the edge of foreclosure. The walls that she had adorned with her own paintings served as daily reminders of dreams deferred. In the quiet hours before dawn, Callista would sit at her rickety kitchen table, staring at a pile of notices and collection letters that threatened to crush her spirit. One dreary, rain-soaked evening, as she meticulously balanced her checkbook and tried to muster the courage to face yet another creditor, a sudden knock startled her from the depths of despair. The sound echoed in the small apartment, mingling with the rhythmic patter of rain against the windowpane. With trepidation, she rose from her threadbare sofa and hesitantly opened the door. Standing there, in a tailored suit that seemed entirely out of place on the worn doorstep of her aging building, was a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. He introduced himself with a smooth yet measured tone as Blaze Hawthorne, a billionaire CEO whose name was whispered in elite circles and whose business acumen was both admired and feared. His dark eyes, cool and discerning, met hers with an intensity that belied the calm of his demeanor. "Callista Mercer," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an unspoken promise, "I have an offer for you." For a long moment, Callista's mind whirled. The sound of the rain and the distant hum of city life seemed to fade as she focused on the man before her. Blaze continued, "I know you're drowning in debt. I know the art studio is on the brink. I can help you, completely clear your liabilities. But I need something in return." Her pulse quickened as she searched his expression for any hint of jest, but he remained utterly serious. "I need you to start a family with me," he declared, the words falling like a gavel. "Give me a baby, and I'll pay off every last cent of your debt." Callista's breath caught in her throat. The proposition was as audacious as it was incomprehensible. For a moment, she doubted whether she was hearing him correctly. A baby? How could a billionaire possibly think that a one-night encounter could serve as the foundation for such an arrangement? And yet, the sincerity in his dark eyes left no room for doubt. Blaze's voice was measured, his words deliberate. "I'm not asking for a transaction without emotion. I believe that true legacy comes from building something meaningful, a family. I've lost so much already, and I want to create something lasting. Let me help you rebuild your life." The room seemed to spin around Callista as she grappled with the absurdity of his offer. Her mind raced through images of sleepless nights, endless calls from debt collectors, and a future that seemed to shrink with every passing day. The idea that someone like Blaze Hawthorne, a man who controlled vast corporate empires, would extend such an unexpected lifeline was both shocking and bewildering. Part of her recoiled at the thought of surrendering her most personal freedom, while another part, a part worn thin by years of desperation, felt a spark of possibility. "Why me?" she finally managed, her voice quivering between indignation and cautious hope. "There must be others in need. Why should I be the one you choose?" Blaze's gaze softened ever so slightly, as if he understood more than she could fathom. "I've watched you, Callista. I've seen the passion in your work, the resilience in your eyes, and the quiet determination that keeps you going even when the world seems determined to knock you down. I'm not offering you charity, I'm offering you a chance at a new beginning. A union that might sound unconventional, but in it, we both can find something far more precious than money, the possibility of love and a shared future." The rain outside intensified, as though echoing the tumult within her. Callista hesitated, every instinct screaming to decline such an outrageous offer. Yet the relentless pressure of her debts, combined with the aching loneliness of a life lived on the margins, pressed her to consider the unthinkable. I need time to think," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "This isn't something I can decide in a heartbeat." Blaze nodded, his expression grave but hopeful. "I understand. But know this, I'm not leaving. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll be here to answer your questions. Until then, think of this not as a mere transaction, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to break free of the chains that bind you and to build a future that might be filled with love, family, and a kind of legacy that money alone cannot buy. In that rain-soaked moment, as thunder rumbled in the distance and the streetlights cast long, flickering shadows across the pavement, Callista stood at a crossroads. The proposal was bewildering, the implications monumental. With a trembling hand, she reached for the worn envelope containing her latest bill and her battered phone, her heart pounding as she contemplated the decision that could either shatter her world or, perhaps, give her a second chance at life. The night was heavy with possibility, and as Blaze's silhouette receded into the misty darkness, Callista knew that she was on the brink of a journey that would redefine her very existence. Callista awoke the next morning to a dismal, rain-soaked Atlanta skyline that seemed to mirror her inner turmoil. The heavy gray light filtered through her window, casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper of her modest apartment. Every sound, the drip of a leaky faucet, the distant hum of traffic, felt amplified in the silence that followed the shocking proposition from the previous night. Still, even in the early gloom, Callista's mind was ablaze with conflicting thoughts. Last night's encounter with Blaze Hawthorne replayed over and over in her head. His smooth, unwavering voice had cut through the noise of her despair as he offered her a deal so outrageous it defied logic: give me a baby, and I'll pay off your debt. His words, both seductive and unnerving, had left her trembling on the threshold of a future she'd never dared to imagine. Now, alone with her debts and her memories, she wrestled with the enormity of what he had proposed. Could a single night of passion really serve as the foundation for a life-changing pact? And, more importantly, was it possible for her to trust a man whose very presence evoked both promise and peril? Sitting at the warm kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, Callista reviewed the sparse notes she had scribbled down on a napkin the night before. The words were barely legible, written in a shaky hand that betrayed her fear and uncertainty. She had written down key points of Blaze's proposal, his insistence that his offer wasn't just charity but a chance to build something lasting, a family, a legacy to counterbalance the emptiness of endless debt. Despite the surreal nature of his words, a part of her felt a glimmer of hope. After all, her life had been a relentless cycle of struggle and sacrifice. Perhaps this audacious proposal was a desperate attempt by fate to grant her a new beginning. Her thoughts drifted to the practicalities she had been forced to confront. The looming threat of foreclosure on her small art studio, the incessant calls from creditors, and the constant anxiety that had become her daily companion, all of these were stark reminders of her vulnerable position. Yet there was also the whisper of something more, a desire for a future filled not with sorrow and sacrifice, but with the warmth of a genuine connection. The idea of a baby, of building a family from scratch with someone as enigmatic as Blaze, was both terrifying and strangely alluring. Was it possible that beneath the cold veneer of a billionaire CEO lay a man who yearned for love and redemption, just as she did? As the morning wore on, Callista paced the narrow confines of her living room, the details of Blaze's proposal echoing in her mind. She recalled the intensity in his eyes when he first appeared at her door, the way his perfectly tailored suit and polished manner contrasted sharply with her own worn, paint-stained clothes. His offer had been as bold as it was baffling, and now she wondered if she had the courage to accept it. She dialed the number he had given her, a number she still hesitated to save, hoping for some semblance of clarity. The phone rang once, twice, and then, just as she was about to hang up, a deep, measured voice answered. "Callista, it's Blaze. I hope you're well this morning." His voice, calm and unwavering despite the weight of his earlier proposal, sent a shiver down her spine. I'm still processing everything," she admitted, her tone barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and then Blaze continued softly, "I understand this isn't something you can decide on immediately. Take all the time you need, but know that I'll be here tomorrow, ready to answer any questions you have." Hanging up, Callista felt a small measure of relief, at least he was giving her space to think. Yet the unanswered questions loomed large. What exactly did it mean to give him a baby? Was it a literal arrangement, or was there some underlying promise of emotional partnership hidden behind the stark terms? And why had Blaze, a man of immense wealth and power, chosen her, a struggling artist with nothing to her name, as the person to share in his vision of family? The day unfolded in a blur of practical concerns. Callista returned to her studio, her mind in a constant tug-of-war between her artistic passion and the financial dread that had driven her to consider Blaze's proposal in the first place. She attempted to lose herself in her paintings, splashing bold strokes of color onto canvases in a desperate bid to capture the chaos and hope that swirled within her. But every so often, a pause in her work brought a wave of introspection. She wondered if her art could serve as an outlet for her inner conflict, a visual diary of her journey from desperation to the possibility of love. Throughout the afternoon, calls from creditors and reminders of overdue bills punctuated her solitude, pulling her back to a harsher reality. Yet even as she balanced her finances and negotiated with insurance representatives, the memory of Blaze's earnest tone lingered like a distant melody. His promise to return the next day, to offer further clarity, became a beacon amid the murkiness of her struggles. In those quiet moments, she found herself daring to imagine a future ere the burdens of debt were replaced by the simple joys of family life, a future where the fierce determination that had once driven her through endless hardships might be channeled into creating something beautiful and lasting. That evening, as twilight painted the Atlanta sky in shades of deep purple and orange, Callista sat by her window with a journal in hand. The soft scratch of her pen filled the silence as she tried to articulate the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. Every word was a small act of defiance against the despair that had long dictated her life. She wrote about the raw fear of losing herself in a deal that seemed too outlandish to be real, yet also about the unexpected glimmer of possibility that had arisen in Blaze's proposal. She chronicled her uncertainty, her longing, and the hesitant hope that maybe, just maybe, this bold, shocking offer was the catalyst she needed to transform her life. As the night deepened, Callista's thoughts turned to her family, the gentle smiles of her mother's faded photographs and the innocent laughter of a sibling she scarcely remembered. She wondered if they, too, might have dared to dream of a life free from the crushing weight of financial ruin. Perhaps, in accepting Blaze's proposition, she could finally break free of the cycle that had defined her existence for so long. With the final lines of her journal written in the quiet solitude of her room, Callista resolved to face whatever the next day would bring. She knew that the decision she was about to make was monumental, fraught with risks and uncertainties. Yet, in that dim, hopeful light of the Atlanta night, she also sensed that the promise of a new beginning, one that might blend the harsh realities of her past with the tender possibility of an unforeseen future, was too powerful to ignore. And so, with a trembling heart and a mind heavy with dreams, she drifted into a fitful sleep, awaiting the dawn and the return of the man whose proposal had irrevocably altered the course of her life. Callista awoke to a fragile morning light filtering through the threadbare curtains of her modest apartment, her body still echoing the intensity of the night before. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a damp chill that clung to the windows and crept into her bones. For a long while, she lay motionless, her mind adrift in a tangle of sensations, the remnants of passionate encounters, the lingering warmth of Blaze's touch, and the undeniable echo of his whispered promises. As her eyes fluttered open, every detail of that fevered night came flooding back, the opulent suite where Blaze had swept her into his world, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, and how in the midst of an arrangement that had seemed so transactional, an unexpected tenderness had blossomed between them. Slowly, Callista rose, each movement deliberate as if she were reawakening not just her body but the delicate, newfound emotions that now stirred within her. In the quiet solitude of her room, she reached for a glass of water on a rickety bedside table, the cool liquid offering a stark contrast to the lingering heat of her skin. As she sipped, her thoughts churned. Was it possible that the desperate proposal Blaze had made, the outrageous demand for a child in exchange for the erasure of her crippling debt, had sparked something real? Last night, amid the soft lamplight and whispered confessions, she had felt a stirring in her heart that went beyond mere survival. It was as if, In that intimate collision of two vastly different lives, a fragile hope had taken root. Her mind wandered back to the moments before dawn. In the luxurious confines of Blaze's suite, where expensive fabrics and gentle music had provided a backdrop to their passion, both had seemed to hesitate between the realms of practicality and emotion. While the promise of financial salvation still hung in the balance, there was now an unspoken bond, a silent acknowledgement that something transformative had occurred. Callista recalled the softness in Blaze's eyes when he had murmured apologies for the impetuous nature of their arrangement, and the way his hand had lingered on hers as if unwilling to let go of that fleeting connection. Those subtle gestures, so rare in his typically controlled demeanor, had awakened in her a longing not just for freedom from debt, but for a chance to be truly seen and cherished. As morning deepened, Callista went about her routine with an altered rhythm. While she dressed in her worn but beloved outfit, a faded blouse paired with jeans that had seen better days, she couldn't help but replay the fragments of their conversation. In the quiet of her small kitchen, she mechanically prepared a modest breakfast, a slice of toast, a smear of peanut butter, and a cup of weak coffee. Each action was performed with an absent-minded tenderness as if she were trying to hold on to the memory of Blaze's whispered words. Outside, the city stirred with its usual urgency, but within the confines of her apartment, time moved slowly and thoughtfully. During a rare moment of solitude, Callista sat at her window, watching droplets of rain still glisten on the glass as the city came to life. She thought about the promises Blaze had made, not just the one to pay off her debt, but his quiet assurance that there was something more than a mere transaction between them. That promise resonated with her deeply, stirring emotions that she had long buried beneath layers of financial despair and artistic longing. She felt both vulnerable and inexplicably hopeful. The world outside was indifferent to her inner struggle, yet she found herself determined to seek answers, to understand whether their passionate night was nothing more than a desperate escape or the beginning of something genuine. Later that day, Callista ventured out to her art studio, a cramped space on the second floor of an aging building that housed not only her canvases but also the dreams she had nurtured for years. As she set up her easel and prepared to lose herself in the creative process, her mind kept drifting back to Blaze. She couldn't concentrate on the vibrant swirls of paint or the interplay of light on the canvas. Instead, every brushstroke felt imbued with the memory of his touch, every hue seemed to whisper his name. In the solitude of her studio, Callista allowed herself to explore the emotional landscape left in the wake of their night together. She began sketching hurried lines that gradually coalesced into an abstract portrait, a fusion of chaos and tenderness, capturing the tumultuous mix of fear, hope, and longing that had overtaken her. The act of painting became a cathartic ritual, a way to externalize the complexities swirling inside her. With each stroke, she felt as though she was reconstructing not just her art, but herself, piecing together fragments of a past filled with hardship and a present suddenly illuminated by unexpected passion. The canvas became a silent diary, chronicling the evolution of her emotions from despair to a cautious optimism that perhaps, against all odds, she might dare to embrace a future that included both love and security. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Atlanta skyline, Callista found herself alone on her apartment's small balcony. The cool night air brushed against her skin, and the distant sounds of the city created a soft, constant murmur in the background. With a cup of tea in hand, she allowed herself to reflect on the mysterious events that had upended her life. In that reflective solitude, she pondered the paradox of her situation. An offer that had seemed as outrageous as it was cruel had, unexpectedly, kindled a flicker of genuine connection in the midst of despair. She wondered what fate had in store, if the promise Blaze had made was truly a lifeline or merely a desperate gambit born of his own loneliness and need for redemption. As the night deepened, her thoughts grew more resolute. The fear of being used for someone else's gain was still very real, yet she recognized that the experience had also awakened something dormant within her, a desire not only for financial freedom, but for a life enriched by love, creativity, and a shared journey toward healing. Though the scars of debt and hardship had defined her past, there was now a tentative vision of a future where every brushstroke, every whispered word, and every vulnerable moment could be the building blocks of a new beginning. Callista resolved to hold on to that vision as she drifted into a fitful sleep that night. In the quiet darkness, the memory of Blaze's gentle eyes and the echo of his promise mingled with the soft scratch of her paintbrush on canvas, a lullaby of hope in a world that, for the first time in a long time, seemed full of possibilities. Callista spent the next several days in a whirlwind of anxious investigation, the shocking proposal and the passionate night with Blaze still reverberating through every quiet moment of her troubled existence. Determined to understand every twist of fate that had led to their surreal union, she began to comb through the remnants of her financial records and the sparse clues left behind by the agency that had once haunted her with relentless debt collectors. Every call, every paper trail, seemed to point toward a labyrinthine conspiracy that defied simple explanation. In the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Blaze's offer than a mere escape from financial ruin, that someone, somewhere, had orchestrated the entire encounter. Late one afternoon, while the humid Atlanta sun filtered weakly through the rain clouds, Callista met with a discreet financial advisor at her modest art studio, a temporary sanctuary where her passion for painting had once thrived, now intermingled with a desperate need for answers. With trembling fingers, she recounted the details of Blaze's proposition and the fervor of that unforgettable night. The advisor, a wiry man with a compassionate yet businesslike manner, pored over her bank statements and transaction records. He pointed out several irregularities, unusually large deposits that she couldn't recall receiving, payments that had been funneled through obscure intermediaries, and even a series of charges from a high-end concierge service that she had never authorized. "It looks as if someone has been manipulating your accounts," he said gravely. "This isn't just about paying off your debt, it might be a well-planned maneuver to control you." The words sent a shiver through Callista, confirming her worst fears that her vulnerability had been exploited in ways she never imagined. At the same time, Blaze was quietly launching his own internal investigation. In his sprawling penthouse office, amid walls lined with accolades and the faint hum of a secure server, he reviewed emails and confidential memos with his trusted legal advisors. A pattern was emerging, a series of encrypted messages from an intermediary going by the name Raina Gray. The terse, almost clinical messages detailed logistics of booking hotel suites, confirming check-in times, and even ensuring that specific hotel staff would later testify that a woman, described in vague terms, had appeared nervous and distracted. Blaze's jaw tightened as he discovered that several of these messages were linked to shell companies with financial ties to a rival executive known as Brandon Keyes, a man infamous for his ruthless tactics and long-standing vendettas against Blaze's empire. Keyes, it seemed, had a lot to gain by creating a scandal that would not only tarnish Blaze's reputation but also destabilize his carefully built financial empire. As the days blurred into sleepless nights, Callista and Blaze found themselves independently revisiting the events of that fateful night. In a series of secret meetings arranged in hushed corners of upscale cafes and quiet hotel lobbies, they compared notes. Callista recounted every disjointed fragment of memory, the hazy sensation of losing control, the fleeting warmth in Blaze's eyes, and the overwhelming mix of desperation and hope that had surged through her when he promised to erase her debt. Blaze, in turn, admitted that his usual ironclad control had cracked under the weight of unexpected vulnerability. He recalled the moment he realized that what had begun as a cold business proposition might have ignited something far deeper, a spark of connection that he had never thought possible. In the quiet intimacy of these clandestine meetings, their professional investigations slowly merged with personal confessions. The narrative they pieced together grew increasingly intricate, an elaborate scheme involving forged documents, manipulated hotel records, and a covert network of intermediaries. All signs pointed to an orchestrated plan, meticulously designed to force them into a legally binding union that neither of them had truly chosen. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, Callista sat cross-legged on the floor of her tiny studio amid unfinished canvases and scattered brushes. She stared at a copy of the marriage certificate, its ink still fresh in her mind, and tried to recall the sensations of that overwhelming night. Was it possible that her memory had been tampered with, that she had been drugged or somehow coerced into signing away her autonomy? The thought was both terrifying and maddening. With her heart pounding, she resolved that every detail must be scrutinized, her past, her finances, even the manner in which she had been approached by debt collectors in recent months. There were discrepancies, she was sure, hidden among the mundane details of her daily transactions. And somewhere, in the convoluted web of records and encrypted emails, lay the key to understanding why someone would go to such lengths to bind her and Blaze together. Blaze, for his part, had grown increasingly restless in his lofty office. He had always prided himself on controlling every variable in his life, but now, with his empire threatened by the specter of scandal, he felt that control slipping through his fingers. Late at night, after the last of his meetings had ended and the corridors of his penthouse were silent, he would pace the polished floors, replaying the events of that chaotic night over and over. Every detail, the look in Callista's eyes when she first realized what was happening, the way his own voice had faltered as he delivered the shocking proposition, gnawed at him. It wasn't just about business strategy anymore, it was personal. He began to wonder if the orchestrators of this scheme had miscalculated, if they had inadvertently sown the seeds for something that could not be easily undone. In one particularly intense meeting with his legal team, Blaze demanded that they uncover every trace of communication involving Raina Gray. The team's lead investigator, a sharp and unflappable woman named Livia, presented him with a series of emails that painted a chilling picture. The messages were cold and precise, almost devoid of emotion, detailing the logistics of the planned, accidental, encounter at the resort. It was as if the conspirators had treated their scheme like a corporate merger, each detail calculated to produce maximum impact with minimal risk. The revelation that Brandon Keyes, a rival with a notorious reputation, was behind these communications sparked a fury in Blaze that he had not felt in years. Keyes' plan was simple yet diabolical: force a scandalous marriage that would not only embarrass Blaze but also create a rift in his inner circle, leaving him vulnerable in the eyes of investors and competitors. As the storm of revelations gathered, Callista and Blaze found solace in each other's company. In quiet, candlelit corners of the resort's secluded lounges, they shared their fears and frustrations. Callista's voice trembled as she admitted that she had always felt invisible, like her art, her struggles, and her identity were easily overlooked in a world dominated by wealth and power. Blaze, for the first time, revealed that his hardened exterior was a mask for profound loneliness, a life lived in a gilded cage of expectations and ruthless competition. Their confessions, raw and unvarnished, deepened the connection between them, blurring the lines between a calculated investigation and a burgeoning intimacy. In those moments, the orchestrated nature of their union transformed from a source of humiliation into a catalyst for something transformative. Together, they vowed to confront the forces manipulating their lives, not just to reclaim their personal freedom but to expose the corruption that threatened to undo everything Blaze had built. In that dark, rain-soaked evening, amid scattered documents and whispered conspiracies, Callista and Blaze forged an unspoken alliance, a promise to face the coming storm together, armed with the truth and bolstered by a connection that defied the original, desperate terms of their agreement. Callista returned to her modest studio that evening with a heavy heart and a mind racing with conflicting emotions. The revelation that her desperate agreement with Blaze had now taken on an unexpected emotional dimension left her torn between the practicality of ending the arrangement and the possibility that something genuine had taken root. As she sat down at her cluttered work table, surrounded by unfinished canvases and splatters of vibrant paint, she replayed the intense conversation from earlier that day, when, in the quiet of an upscale hotel lounge, Blaze had asked her pointedly why they couldn't simply end the union and go their separate ways. She remembered how, for a fleeting moment, his eyes had betrayed a raw vulnerability that was completely at odds with the image of a ruthless billionaire CEO. "Why can't we just end this?" she had asked in a trembling voice, her own heart pounding as if she were daring to expose every hidden wound. Blaze had hesitated, his jaw tightening as he searched for the right words. "Because," he had murmured, "even if this union was forged in desperation, I have discovered something real in you, something I never thought possible." His admission had hung in the air like a fragile promise, and although Callista had wanted to retreat from the emotional peril of the moment, she found herself inexplicably drawn to the warmth behind his carefully controlled facade. Now, in the solitude of her studio, Callista's thoughts churned. She picked up a paintbrush and hesitated before dipping it into a jar of cerulean blue. Every stroke on the canvas was an act of defiance against the bleakness of her circumstances, a testament to her will to create beauty even when her life felt mired in despair. Yet, as she began to sketch abstract shapes and lines, her mind kept wandering back to the conversation with Blaze. Was it possible that the man who had offered to erase her debt in exchange for starting a family had come to care for her in a way that transcended the original, transactional nature of their deal? The memory of his gentle tone and the softness in his eyes, rare traits in someone of his imposing stature, both comforted and terrified her. Callista recalled how Blaze had spoken of his loneliness, his relentless battles in the corporate arena that left him isolated despite his wealth and power. In his confession, she had sensed a kindred spirit, a person who had also longed for genuine connection in a world where everything was measured in dollars and decisions were made with clinical precision. That night, as she sat with her heart laid bare, she allowed herself to wonder if the possibility of an unexpected love was worth the risk of further complicating her life. At the same time, however, a logical voice inside her screamed that an annulment might be the only sensible solution. After all, she had never truly consented to a marriage, the proposition had been born of desperation, a way out of crushing debt. Ending it would restore her independence and free her from a burden she never wanted. But then, there was the memory of Blaze's tender gaze, the way he had caressed her hand as if to promise protection and solace. Those moments, fleeting as they were, had stirred something deep within her, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, their fates had been intertwined by more than mere coincidence. Callista spent the next few hours in restless introspection. She reviewed the legal documents that had been thrust upon her, reading and rereading the fine print with a growing sense of uncertainty. Every clause, every signature, seemed to pulse with the weight of a decision that she had made in a moment of utter despair. Now, faced with the possibility of a future with Blaze, a future that might offer both financial salvation and an emotional connection she had never experienced before, she was forced to confront the stark reality of her own desires. In a moment of clarity, she picked up her phone and typed a tentative message to Blaze, asking if they could meet later that night to talk things over in private. The message was simple, yet laden with unspoken questions and the hope that there might be a way to salvage something beautiful from this tangled web of desperation and unexpected passion. Later that evening, under the soft glow of a street lamp outside her studio, Callista met Blaze at a quiet, out-of-the-way cafe known for its intimate atmosphere and hushed conversations. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavements glistening like mirrors in the dim light. Blaze arrived looking uncharacteristically informal, his suit replaced by a dark sweater and jeans, an image that softened the rigid lines of his usual appearance. They found a secluded booth in the back, away from prying eyes and the clatter of casual diners. For the next few hours, they talked in a low, measured tone about everything from their shared pasts to their most private hopes for the future. Blaze revealed that beneath his carefully constructed persona lay a man who had long been starved for genuine affection, a man who had built his empire as a fortress against vulnerability. Callista, in turn, recounted the years of hardship and solitude that had defined her life, the constant struggle to maintain dignity in the face of relentless debt. As they spoke, the initial transaction that had brought them together began to dissolve into something far more complex, a mutual recognition of their shared isolation and the possibility of a love that could heal old wounds. Yet, as the conversation deepened, the specter of practicality loomed large. Callista's mind kept returning to the stark reality of her financial ruin, a looming foreclosure, incessant calls from debt collectors, and the fact that Blaze's original offer had been nothing less than a desperate bargain. "I never wanted a deal like this," she admitted softly, her eyes searching his for reassurance. "I thought I'd be free once my debts were gone, but now, I feel even more trapped." Blaze's expression hardened briefly, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "I know," he replied, his voice heavy with the burden of his own expectations. "I never meant for this to become a chain that binds you. I wanted to give you a way out of your misery, but now I see that in trying to help, I might have taken something away from you that you never even wanted to lose." Their words hung in the air like a delicate balance between liberation and entrapment. The tension of the moment was palpable, a mix of regret, desire, and the weight of choices made in the depths of despair. In that quiet booth, as the cafe's soft jazz murmured in the background, Callista and Blaze confronted the most painful question of all, whether they should untangle the forced bond that had been set upon them, or embrace the unexpected tenderness that had blossomed between them despite all logic. After what felt like hours, they reached a fragile accord. Neither would push for an immediate annulment. Instead, they would allow themselves time to truly understand the depth of their connection, to weigh the tangible benefits of freedom against the intangible allure of a love that might just be genuine. "We owe it to ourselves to see if this can be more than a desperate bargain," Blaze said, his voice a mixture of hope and resignation. "If, in time, we find that what we have is real, then we can decide to build on it. But if not, we'll have the annulment papers ready, and we'll part ways without regret." Callista nodded slowly, her heart heavy with uncertainty yet buoyed by a spark of hope. "I want to believe there's something more, Blaze. I want to think that fate brought us together for a reason." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she briefly touched his. In that fleeting contact, a silent promise passed between them, a promise that they would navigate the labyrinth of their predicament together, even if the future remained as murky as the rain-soaked streets of Atlanta. They parted later that night with a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. As Callista walked home beneath a sky gradually clearing to reveal a scattering of stars, she clutched her phone tightly, already awaiting the next message from Blaze, a message that might, in time, illuminate the path to a future that was entirely their own. Callista's heart pounded as she pored over a stack of documents spread across her cluttered desk in the cramped back office of her art studio. The late afternoon light filtered in through a high window, casting long shadows over the papers that held clues to the bizarre and unwelcome union that had altered her life. For days now, whispers and discreet phone calls had hinted at something far more sinister than a simple, desperate bargain. Determined to understand the full extent of the conspiracy, Callista had dedicated every spare moment to meticulously re-examining her financial records and the suspicious transactions that had plagued her for months. In the margins of bank statements and invoices from obscure intermediaries, she began to detect a pattern: irregular deposits, unexpected charges, and payments routed through shell companies that all seemed designed to trap her in a web of debts and obligations. Late that afternoon, as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, Callista received an encrypted email from a source she'd come to trust, a former employee of one of the agencies that managed her finances. The email, filled with technical details and digital timestamps, described a series of clandestine transactions that pointed directly to a rival executive, Brandon Keyes, known for his cutthroat tactics and long-standing vendettas. The message explained that Keyes had not only orchestrated a fraudulent marriage scheme but had also deliberately manipulated the financial systems to ensure that Callista's debts would balloon, making her even more dependent on the desperate solution Blaze Hawthorne had offered. As Callista read and reread the email, a chill ran down her spine. The meticulous planning, the deliberate tampering of records, and the cold, calculating language of the message all confirmed her worst fears. Her life had been manipulated by someone with a deep-seated grudge against Blaze, and possibly aimed at weakening his empire. At that moment, the phone rang. Callista's hands trembled as she answered, recognizing Blaze's voice immediately. His tone was urgent but laced with a cautious optimism. "Callista, I've just received a report from my legal team," he said. "They've uncovered a trail of encrypted communications. It appears that an intermediary, operating under the alias Raina Gray, coordinated every detail of our supposed union. More disturbingly, these emails revealed that Brandon Keyes financed the entire operation. They discussed disguising our identities, falsifying hotel logs, and even bribing a county clerk to record our marriage certificate as if it were legitimate." Her pulse quickened, and Callista struggled to steady her voice. "So Keyes is behind this entire scheme, using us as pawns in a larger corporate power play?" she asked, the incredulity evident in her tone. "Yes," Blaze replied grimly. It seems Keyes believes that by forcing a scandalous union upon me, he can destabilize my leadership and embarrass me in front of my board. He hoped that the shock of it all would distract everyone from my upcoming merger negotiations, leaving me vulnerable to his advances. I've never encountered such a personal attack in the world of business, and I can't stand the thought that my private life has been weaponized like this. There was a long pause as Blaze's voice dropped to a near whisper. But there's more, Callista. My investigators have tracked additional financial flows linking Keyes to multiple offshore accounts. The sum of these transfers is astronomical. It looks like this was a calculated investment in chaos, designed not only to ruin my reputation but also to leave you with no escape from your debt. Callista closed her eyes for a moment, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The revelation was overwhelming. She had expected to be used as a scapegoat or a bargaining chip, but the cold precision of Keyes' plan was something she had never dared to imagine. When she opened her eyes, they burned with both indignation and a tentative resolve. Blaze, we cannot allow this to continue. If Keyes thinks he can manipulate our lives, then we need to take control, expose him for what he is. I refuse to be the victim in someone else's vendetta. The intensity in his voice softened as Blaze replied, I agree, Callista. I've already instructed my legal team to compile every scrap of evidence we have. We're coordinating with independent forensic experts to verify the authenticity of these emails, the bank records, and the manipulated surveillance footage. Once we have a complete dossier, I plan to go public with everything. It's risky, but it might be the only way to ensure that Keyes is held accountable. His tone grew resolute, edged with a personal promise. I want you to know that I'm in this with you. I never wanted any of this, for you, for me, but if we have to fight this battle, I won't do it alone. In the silence that followed, Callista felt a surge of warmth at his words. They sat together in the cramped office, the ambient sound of the rain outside melding with the low hum of distant city traffic. Slowly, they began to outline their plan. Callista would gather additional records from her financial advisors and document every irregularity she could find. Meanwhile, Blaze promised to pull every resource from his legal and security teams to trace the source of the encrypted communications and follow the money trail back to Keyes. Their conversation was punctuated by moments of silence, where each tried to absorb the enormity of their situation. The trust between them, forged in the heat of desperation and mutual vulnerability, grew ever stronger. As the evening deepened, Blaze and Callista resolved to meet again the next morning, determined to consolidate their findings and prepare a statement for the district attorney. They knew that exposing Keyes would not only protect Blaze's corporate legacy but also free Callista from the shackles of debt and manipulation. With a final exchange of determined glances, they parted ways that night, each carrying the weight of their newfound alliance. In the solitude of their separate rooms, the echoes of their promises reverberated, a shared commitment to fight against the hidden forces that had twisted their lives into a cruel farce. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty and danger, both were bolstered by the hope that together they could reclaim control of their destinies and, in the process, uncover a love that might just redeem them both. Callista's heart pounded as she stepped into the secluded veranda of the resort's rooftop garden, a place where the clamor of the gala below faded into a hushed murmur. The space was framed by a delicate canopy of twinkling fairy lights and lush, overgrown ivy that whispered secrets in the cool night air. Blaze was already there, seated on a wrought iron bench with a distant look in his eyes, as though the weight of his decisions had pressed him into quiet solitude. The air between them was charged with unspoken questions and a tension that bordered on desperation. For a long moment, neither spoke, simply absorbing the gravity of the situation. The scandal that had threatened to ruin Blaze's empire and entangle Callista in a web of financial despair had, unexpectedly, forged a bond between them, a bond that now demanded honest confrontation. Finally, Blaze broke the silence, his voice low and tremulous. Callista, I've been trying to reconcile what happened, the deal, that one night, and the person I saw in you. I thought I was making a cold, calculated decision, but now I can't imagine a future without you. His eyes glistened with a rare vulnerability, the veneer of his typical stoicism giving way to raw emotion. Callista's gaze searched his face, her own heart aching with both longing and uncertainty. "I feel it too, Blaze," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm terrified. Terrified that accepting this might mean surrendering the last of my independence, that I might become nothing more than a pawn in your world, a means to an end." Her words hung in the air like fragile glass, each syllable weighted with years of struggle, debt, and the pain of being overlooked. Blaze's expression hardened for a moment as he wrestled with the duality of his intentions. "I never intended to hurt you," he said, reaching out tentatively to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. "I wanted to help, to free you from your burdens. But I've come to realize that what we have is more than a transaction. I'm not just offering to clear your debt, I'm offering my heart. And if that means facing the scrutiny of my board, the envy of competitors, or even the challenges of a life completely different from the one I've known, then I'm willing to risk it all." The intensity of his confession sent a shiver through Callista. She drew a deep breath, her eyes glistening with a mixture of defiance and tenderness. "Blaze, every fiber of my being has longed for a chance at something real, something that isn't dictated by numbers or contracts. But I'm scared. Scared that if I give in, I might lose myself entirely, and that you might someday regret letting me in, that you might decide I'm only a means to an end." She paused, steadying her voice as the cool night air swirled around them. "I'm not asking for endless promises, but I need to know that if we move forward, it will be because we choose to stand together, because we both believe in building something that's ours, not imposed on us by some twisted scheme." Blaze's eyes softened further as he took her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that was both tender and resolute. "I choose you, Callista," he murmured. "Not because of a deal, but because you've awakened in me a truth I can no longer ignore. Let's confront our past and decide our future on our own terms. I promise to protect you, to honor your independence, and to fight every shadow that seeks to tear us apart." In that moment, amid the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant echo of city life below, the two of them forged an unbreakable pact. Their voices, though trembling with fear and hope, resonated with the promise of a new beginning, a love that was as unpredictable as it was genuine. As the night deepened, the cold distance between them melted away, leaving only the fragile, powerful truth of two hearts daring to beat as one, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead together. On the night of Valentine's Day, the resort's grand ballroom shimmered with an ethereal glow, a cascade of soft pinks and golds reflecting off polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Callista Mercer stood near a sweeping balcony that overlooked the glittering city below, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for a sign of what was to come. The tumult of the past weeks, the desperate bargain, the passion of that unforgettable night with Blaze Hawthorne, the labyrinth of secrets and manipulated documents, had led them to this decisive moment. Now, with the conspiracy exposed and Brandon Key's treachery laid bare, the forced arrangement that had once seemed a cruel sentence was transforming into something altogether different. Inside, Blaze's presence was unmistakable. He emerged from the throng of guests with a quiet determination, his tailored suit replaced by a more relaxed, yet still impeccably stylish, ensemble that hinted at the vulnerability he now allowed himself to show. As he stepped onto the balcony, their eyes met. For a long moment, neither spoke. The soft murmur of conversations, the distant strains of a live string quartet, and the cool night air all faded into an intimate silence shared only between them. Blaze approached slowly, his footsteps measured, until he stood beside Callista. "Callista," he began in a hushed tone that carried both relief and tenderness, "tonight, after everything we've endured, I realize that what started as a desperate transaction has grown into something I never anticipated. Something that feels utterly irreplaceable." His voice wavered with emotion, and he gently took her hand in his. "I know our union was never born out of love, but rather necessity. But over these weeks, in our moments of shared truth and the battles we've fought side by side, I've discovered a connection that transcends any contract or obligation. I don't want to lose you, not now, not ever." Callista's eyes glistened as she searched his face, recalling the gentle warmth in his gaze during their quiet conversations in darkened hotel lounges, the way his hand had steadied hers during moments of fear. "Blaze," she whispered, "I was terrified when you proposed that night. I thought I'd be just a means to an end, a way to erase my debts. But what I feel now, this is something real. I've come to understand that even in the midst of manipulation and corporate warfare, there's a chance for genuine happiness. I want more than just to be free from debt. I want a future that we build together, on our own terms." Their words, raw and unguarded, mingled with the soft strains of music as if nature itself were bearing witness to their confessions. The crowd inside the ballroom erupted into spontaneous applause when Blaze's voice, carried over the public address system, broke into a declaration of gratitude and personal revelation. "I stand before you this evening as a man who has been forced into circumstances beyond his control, yet who has found in the unlikeliest of places, through the kindness and passion of Callista Mercer, a reason to embrace life anew." His announcement was met with stunned silence and then, gradually, with resounding cheers from the assembled dignitaries and philanthropists. Amid the celebratory clamor, Callista felt the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. The intricate web of deception, once designed to humiliate and ensnare, had inadvertently given birth to a profound, transformative connection. Later, as the gala's formal program gave way to a more relaxed after-party in the hotel's private lounge, Blaze and Callista stole away to a quiet corner beneath a cascading arrangement of roses and twinkling fairy lights. There, away from the prying eyes of reporters and corporate sharks, they allowed themselves a moment of unfiltered emotion. "Tonight, everything changes," Blaze murmured, his voice barely audible above the soft strains of a distant piano. "I've arranged for all legal formalities regarding our union to be reviewed. We will have a chance to cancel what was forced upon us if that is what you truly desire. But I ask you to consider something else, a possibility that what has begun here might not have to end. I want to build something real with you, Callista, beyond a transaction, beyond a desperate bargain." Callista's heart pounded as she looked into his eyes, a tumult of fear, hope, and determination swirling within her. "I've always dreamed of a life where my art and my heart aren't chained down by circumstance," she confessed. "I never imagined that I'd find someone who sees me, not as a debtor, not as a charity case, but as a person worthy of love. Blaze, if we choose to face the future together, we must do so freely, with honesty and with no hidden agendas." They embraced, the intimacy of the moment transcending the years of hardship and betrayal that had led them here. In the quiet sanctuary of that moonlit balcony, they made a pact. They would confront the legal entanglements together, expose the treachery that had bound them by force, and then, with all obstacles cleared, decide whether to sever the unwanted ties or to forge a new path, one where love, not debt or corporate scheming, would define their future. As the night deepened, the gala's exuberance continued around them, but on that small balcony, time slowed. Blaze and Callista sat side by side, their fingers intertwined, drawing strength from each other. The promise of a new beginning hung in the cool air, a Valentine's miracle born from chaos and manipulation, now blossoming into something genuine and hopeful. They knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, media scrutiny, legal battles, and the ever-looming shadow of a rival determined to see them undone. Yet, in that intimate moment, they resolved to face every trial together, trusting that the love they had found, unexpected and transformative, would be the guiding light that would lead them to a future where they were truly free. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in gentle hues of pink and gold, Blaze and Callista stepped away from the balcony and into the promise of a new day. Their hearts, once heavy with despair and manipulated desperation, now beat with a quiet, enduring rhythm, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to conquer even the darkest of schemes. And so, with renewed determination and a shared vow to embrace every uncertainty together, they prepared to rewrite their destinies, forging a future defined not by forced bargains but by the honest, unyielding promise of two souls united in hope.